Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. ISIS, All That Glitters. The goddess next door takes on a bikini-clad bank robber in this action-packed, all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS, All That Glitters in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. A couple of weeks ago, I was doing some Christmas shopping on Madison Avenue and 44th Street. And I was shocked to see that many of the retailers that used to be on Madison Avenue and 44th Street had been closed. All of the stores that I used to frequent, like your Johnston and Murphy, your J. Crew, and many other retailers had been closed. And in the place of those stores had been a bunch of blank windows or for rent signs, and the traffic on those streets for a Saturday was next to none. There was next to no foot traffic, and there was next to no vehicle traffic. The entire area of Madison Avenue and 44th Street, prime real estate in Manhattan, New York City's most popular area, had been rendered into a practical ghost town. And as I was walking down those streets of Madison Avenue and 44th Street, I was taken back to the time when I was a kid back in the late 70s and early 1980s in the South Bronx, when the South Bronx had practically looked like it had been bombed in a nuclear explosion, and we had mostly abandoned buildings, dilapidated buildings, and empty storefronts all around us in my old Bronx neighborhood. Because that's what Madison Avenue, the prime real estate here in New York, practically looked like, with all of those for rent signs and all of those empty storefronts where at one time premium retailers like Johnston and Murphy and J. Crew often resided for the last 10 years before, but these days those types of retailers have been forced to close. Now, I would love to blame this all on the retail apocalypse that has been transpiring all throughout the country as related to people shopping online and most people being forced to take lower wage jobs, which prevents them from being able to buy high-end consumer items. But what happened on Madison Avenue and 44th Street is the result of a speculator market as related to New York's real estate. Now, when I take a critical examination of New York's real estate market, it was booming for many years, but I'm now starting to see it getting ready to bust, because when you have so many retail spaces in prime real estate like Madison Avenue, Fifth Avenue, and Broadway filled with for rent signs all the way from 96th Street all the way down to the Village, we're starting to see a serious problem as related to retail real estate, not only in the top real estate market of Manhattan, but I'm now starting to see it here in the Bronx as well. And when you have a real estate market filled with lots of properties at overvalue, what's going to happen is the boom market that took place over the last 10 years is going to go bust. And the reason why it is going to go bust is because of those speculators I mentioned a few minutes ago. Because I saw this type of speculator mentality in the comic book industry back in the early 90s when I was collecting comics. And what that speculator mentality does is it really creates a marketplace where nothing moves. Now, in the collector comic, action figure, and other collectibles marketplaces, what makes an item have value is the fact that there are people who are demanding that product. And because there's a demand for the product, this is what increases the value as related to supply. Now, your real estate moguls these days, they thought that because Manhattan's real estate market at one time had a limited supply, that they could hold on to these properties and that they would continue to increase in value. Unfortunately, what has happened is they didn't trade enough of these items in order to maintain the value. Instead, they hoarded these properties, and because they have hoarded these properties, this is what's leading to
the areas going into decline as related to the quality of those areas, and was what's going to eventually lead to the drop in the value of those rents. Now, you have, in order to understand the difference between a collector and a speculator, I'll explain this right now, because a collector collects because it is their passion, it is what they love, and it's what they care about. For example, I'm a comic book fan, a sci-fi fan, and a fantasy fan, so I buy collectible items that I like, and I'm holding on to them because I like them, and I have them out of the package, and I display them because I like them. A hoarder, on the other hand, is an individual who buys items in the hopes of getting some sort of return on the investment, and they don't care about the items. All they care about is making the money off the item, and they will hold on to something in the hopes of getting some sort of speculated value for it. And when they do that, what they do is they try to drive up the prices with their behavior. Either they are paying too much for an item, or they are holding on to lots of items and making it where there isn't enough supply. And what they do is artificially increase the value of things, and they also destroy the ability of the commerce to flow because they are holding on to large quantities of supply and artificially inflating the value. And what's happened in the New York real estate market is you've had a lot of these hoarders and speculators come in, and the speculators and the hoarders, what they're doing is hoarding property, and they are driving up the value to artificially high levels. And those artificially high levels have people thinking that you can get $400 a month a square foot for retail space, and that's a number that no retailer can afford to pay, because at over $400 a month, or $375 a square foot for retail space, it is next to impossible for a retailer to turn a profit, with any sort of business. Because while the location may be prime, you just don't make enough money to be able to make a profit on any business. Now, retail has always been a business with a razor-thin profit margin, and the rents make it where that profit margin can go from razor-thin to you operating in the red every month. And what's happened with New York's real estate market is, because of the hoarders and the speculators, the price of real estate has gotten so high that most retailers are now balking at opening up businesses, and most small businesses can't even think about opening up a location in this area because the rent is so high. And because the rent is so high, this is what's preventing businesses from opening in these at one time prime real estate markets and developing and building businesses in the infrastructure, because these businesses are just, these rents are just too expensive. And because these rents are so expensive, most people just can't think about either opening a business, and most of the chain stores that they speculated would be coming to these retail areas, many of those chain stores are now balking. And some of these chain stores have operated for so long that they're like the Duane Reades, the Walgreens, they have practically maxed out the area as related to their retail footprint, so they can't open up any more businesses. So the real estate market in New York right now, as related to retail, is in a place where it's going to get ready to decline. But the landlords, they just don't understand that their rent is too blank high, and that because it's so blank high, this is why there are so many vacancies. And there are vacancies in some areas for 5 years, 6 years, and 7 years at this point. And these landlords are still speculating, believing that the market is going to bounce back. Unfortunately, the market isn't going to bounce back, because right now the rents are just too high for high-end retailers like your J. Crews and your Johnston and Murphys and many others to afford rent there these days, and it's too high for a small business entrepreneur to even consider opening in these locations. And sadly, your speculators are not looking at the big picture of things because they have high apple pie in the sky, looks in their eyes, and they're looking to the stars at a big return, but they're not looking at the reality of what's going on as related to New York's real estate market, because they're so busy speculating and anticipating a big return from a high-end retailer renting one of these spots, or some billion-dollar business renting a spot here, that they don't see that the market is already dead as related to that. Because when you have high-end retailers balking at renting at places like Madison Avenue, considered to be the highest of high-end real estate, there clearly is a problem as related to the price. And when you have your millionaires and billionaires balking at these high prices, then it's clear that there is a problem with the prices as related to the marketplace. And this, again, is very similar to what transpired in the comic book industry back in the 90s. You had all of these collectors hoarding books, speculating on anticipating a big payday as related to many of these comics that even some of them just came out 1 month before. And what happened was we had a huge crash in the industry in the 90s, and many of those people who hoarded all of those comics wound up having an entire collection of absolutely worthless books because their hoarding of supply led to the artificial inflation of value, and then that artificial inflation of value wound up crashing back to the actual price. In some cases, actually even less than the actual price, because the artificial inflation was not really based on an actual demand. And in order for something to have value, it has to be, one, scarce, and two, it has to have a realistic demand, and that realistic demand has to be met with a realistic price. And when you have speculators in any sort of marketplace, what they do is artificially inflate the demand, and they artificially inflate the price by making all sorts of unrealistic price demands on the marketplace. And when they make these unrealistic demands on the marketplace, what it does is it artificially inflates the value of any sort of commodity, but in actuality, that's not the actual price that it's going to be. And when we have all of those speculators pulling away from the marketplace, then what happens is everything starts to fall back to the actual price that it actually is. And what's happening to New York's real estate market is that the once highly valued New York's real estate market is now starting to fall because more and more people are leaving New York City. More and more people are walking away from New York as an investment capital. And this is why areas like Madison Avenue and 44th Street are becoming ghost towns, because you have all of these speculators still believing that it's worth more than it actually is, when in reality you can see that there is no demand for this property because the price is just too high, and most of the people who they were speculating and anticipating of buying this property now are no longer expressing interest in buying that property or renting that property, because to operate a business in that area would put them at a loss. Moreover, they now see other options for doing their business these days, because now you don't really need to have a retail footprint in an area like Madison Avenue anymore in order to drum up a reputation or build a brand anymore as related to business. Most people these days, they build businesses out of their homes, they build businesses out of their bedrooms, and they drop ship product from warehouses to individuals through e-commerce. So most businesses have no real interest in opening high-end retail in high-end areas anymore, because most people don't go out to shop at high-end retail. So New York's real estate market has rent that's too blank high, and what's happening to it, as I'm seeing, with from that ghost town on 44th Street and Madison Avenue, is we have a real estate marketplace that is getting ready to fall, just like comics did in the 1990s, and it's going to fall because we have too many speculators speculating on the value of New York property, and with that speculation, sadly, we're seeing a complete decline in the quality of life here in New York City, because as they hoard all of this property looking for a big payday, the property that they're hoarding is starting to deteriorate. The property that they're hoarding is starting to lose value. And that's what happened to many of the comic collectors back in the day of the 90s. They hoarded all of those #1 issues of many of those Image comics, those Valiant comics, those DC comics, those Marvel comics, and all of those books at one time were speculated at high values, but now they are absolutely worthless because there are, one, so many of them out there, and two, the demand for those books has practically dropped all the way to next to nobody because no one is interested in buying them. And the same thing is happening here in New York with New York's real estate market. Yes, at one time this was considered high-end real estate when there was a demand for it, but now that there is no demand for it due to the high rents, the high taxes, and the high cost of retail, this is why areas like your 44th Street and Madison Avenue, once considered the crown jewel of New York's real estate, is now dropped to the value of a cubic zirconia. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. There you will find all of my books in paperback and Kindle formats. And that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Samurai Goddess. The Goddess Next Door takes on Kung Fu killers in this action-packed martial arts Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Samurai Goddess in paperback and e-readers today.